We'll make the best of this. We all have different backgrounds. There are some language differences, and video conferencing is, it may not be ideal, but it's one way to connect. And thanks for the invitation to spend some time with you. So we're going to talk a little bit about digital health from a Canadian perspective in terms of what's going on in Canada. But as you'll shortly see, the Canadian perspective is very influenced by the United States, and that plays an important role in our pursuit of technology for a variety of reasons. So digital health is a broad term, big tent. It includes a number of different things. Can you advance the slide, please? So digital health can include wearable technology, electronic medical records, the transmission of medical data. So whether or not we're talking about the digitization of data, the transmission of data, or using sensors that are worn in sort of a consumer context or a health and wellness context, all this kind of loosely falls under the umbrella of digital health. There's not a rigorous definition for this, but those are some examples of the kinds of technology that are included in this category. From a Canadian perspective, pursuing new technology, we have clear limitations. Canada, if you look at global pharmaceutical drug sales, Canada constitutes about 2% of all drug sales globally. So Canada is a small country in terms of global market analysis. And that's important because that also means that global companies that operate like Medtronic or Stryker or Boston Scientific or Pfizer or Merck, global healthcare companies that operate are not going to consider Canada very much in their decision making because we are a small market, again, at roughly 2%. So when you're talking about innovation then, global companies by and large are not going to be doing research in Canada. As you might imagine, I'm going to have some colleagues here who might disagree with me about this. So this slide has some opinions on my behalf. But so when do you find innovation taking place in Canada? You find it taking place when you're talking about Canadian-owned companies. So this be startup companies or larger companies which are Canadian-owned. So some examples of Canadian-owned companies which are larger that would be relevant to our conversation would be telecommunication companies like TELUS and their subsidiary TELUS Health, Baylis Medical, or BlackBerry. Okay. Otherwise, in the health arena, we're really looking at startups. We want to talk about innovation taking place in Canada. An important player in the innovative environment in Canada is actually investors from the United States. So Canadians tend to be a little risk averse. Canadians can be reluctant to invest in risky ventures. So often our talent gets recognized by Americans before Canadians realize it. So the joke in Canada is, you want to get recognized, go down to the United States and then come back. And that's what happens to our musicians, our actors, and our innovators. So Canada is pretty good at developing technology. We do a poor job at commercializing technology. Can you advance the slide, please? So in talking about digital health, I think probably one of the most fertile or best examples or hot examples to talk about right now would be wearable technology. And wearable technology is a very different kind of product than what we're used to. So let's just consider the analogy with buying a book or a video. You buy a book, you purchase the video, but you never watched the video and you never read the book. So from the manufacturer's perspective, they don't care. They made their money. You bought the book, it doesn't matter if you read it. You purchased the video, it doesn't matter if you read it. When we're talking about wearable technology, though, this is different. So on the left-hand slide, this is actually a Canadian company in Quebec. This is sort of the Cadillac or the high end of sensors for the body in a consumer environment or in a retail environment. So it looks like a black muscle shirt or t-shirt. And it'll collect data on a number of different things, including cardiac rate and even the amount of volume in your chest when you breathe. It's around $400 Canadian. It's not cheap. So here we go. Someone has purchased this electronic t-shirt. And the idea is when they go to the gym, they'd wear this electronic t-shirt throughout the day or at the gym, and they collect all this data on how they're doing in the gym or how they're doing throughout the day. So we have two different points of activity here. The first point is adoption. With adoption, the consumer purchased the good. But the second point is something that I would loosely call adherence. And adherence basically says, well, you bought the good, but did you continue to use it? If someone buys a wearable piece of technology and just puts it in their top desk drawer and never uses it again, that doesn't work very well. So when someone's buying wearable technology, they have to continue to use the technology because the company is looking to gather that data from the user of the technology to create future business opportunities. It would be kind of like Google not being able to store your preferences when you read or when you search things. So part of the way Google works as a search engine is knowing the kinds of articles you've read in the past and the kinds of things you search for. Well, in a vaguely similar way here, although the business model is not clear yet, for wearable technology, they need data. And in order for them to get data as a potential good they can offer in the future, they need people who buy these devices to use these devices. It's not enough just to buy, you need to use it. Next slide, please. Now, Canada's healthcare system is very similar to other healthcare systems globally in the way that I'm about to describe. We have massive bureaucratic problems within our hospitals. The right intentions are here, but the bureaucracy kind of exists for a reason, and it makes things very difficult. So let's consider if you were to purchase a candy bar from the store. If you walk into a store and you purchase a candy bar, you do three things. You chose the candy bar that you were going to buy. You paid for your candy bar, and then you ate your candy bar. Those three steps, which you take for granted as a consumer, are very complicated in our healthcare system. So if you look at this slide, the first step, choosing the product. So here's electronic medical record system. We have a number of different potential options here. I've depicted three. And so one of those is going to be chosen. And that's going to be chosen by a committee. Not a single person, but usually a committee. But wait, there's more. Now we're going to pay for the product. And yes, just to make things more complicated, the people who pay for the product are not the same as those who chose the product. And this would be another committee. But wait, there's more. We go to another step when we talk about using the product. And yes, the person who uses the product is not the same person as the person who paid for the product and is not the same person as the one who chose the product. So we call this the path to purchase. Each one of these steps is likely occupied by a committee. And the sequence of steps that you follow will vary with the type of medical device that we're talking about. So this can be a very complex and time-consuming process. Next slide, please. So this is going to be a controversial slide for some people perhaps, but I have talked about this with physicians up here in Canada in large groups, and no one seems to disagree with me. Let's just start with a little bit of fun. On the right-hand slide here is a fossil. And where do we get fossils from? Well, from a scientific perspective, we get fossils when dinosaurs get caught in a tar pit. They die, and eventually over time, their bodies become fossilized. If you want your technology to be fossilized, target a hospital. Okay? Hospitals are very poor adopters of new technology. Now, there are good reasons behind this. Everybody has the best of intentions. but that's just not enough. So why are hospitals then a technology tar pit? And the same way tar pits are dangerous to dinosaurs. Well, the first thing is, and my students have a lot of trouble appreciating the point I'm about to make, our hospitals have no money. Okay? So as you guys have probably experienced perhaps with your students and your entrepreneurs, when they come up with new ideas, they seem to assume that our hospitals have money to spend. They don't. Our hospitals are fully saturated with other competing technologies, and they just don't have enough money for it all. Second problem, and this is huge. Now, this would be, I'm not a policy guy, I'm not a policy analyst, but this might be an area where government could play an active role. You know, when you're using technology, using drugs in a healthcare context, usually you want an insurance company to pay or cover the cost of that medical good. Well, in order for an insurance company to cover the cost of a good, or in order for an insurance company to pay a physician for their time, we need a reimbursement code. And reimbursement codes take longer to argue for than it does to take to develop a technology. It might take 3 or 4 years to develop a technology, but from what I hear from our colleagues in market access and reimbursement, it can take 5 years or more to develop a reimbursement code. Okay? So let's just step back for a moment. When a physician is supposed to, let's just say we use digital health in a hospital environment, and the physician is supposed to review data sent over the telephone line or by the internet from a pregnant woman and the activity of her baby in her abdominal area, there needs to be a reimbursement code to compensate the physician for spending time to review that data, to spend time looking at a computer screen to look at data sent from someone in the community. So reimbursement codes are the way people get paid. And if we don't have reimbursement codes, then that means we're not able to pay people. If we're not able to pay people, this isn't going anywhere. Third point, we just touched on this in the last slide. There's a very complicated path to purchase for medical technologies in the hospital. And what even makes this more complicated is that it's different for different categories of products. So the path to purchase and the steps involved for a cardiac stent might be very different than, say, a treadmill or a scalpel or an imaging machine. And lastly, what a lot of people tend to forget, and we all do it to some extent, but what a lot of people tend to forget is that technology is not just about hardware, it's about people. And so when you're talking about a hospital environment, you want to introduce new technology, we have to pay attention to impact on physician workflow or workflow in the healthcare environment. People are creatures of habit, and if your technology is going to change workflow, that's going to create a big obstacle. Okay? So we have these challenges here in Canada. I think we share these challenges with a number of other countries, but we're certainly having a lot of fun with these challenges right now. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So where does this leave us? Using wearable technology as an example, and more broadly digital health, even though we have a government-funded healthcare system here in Canada, really the only way this is going to work is through private payer model. In other words, if this is going to work, these technologies have to be cheap enough, have to be low cost enough, so that we as consumers can pay for it with our own money. It's going to be too complicated to try and get this new technology paid for by insurance companies and used in a hospital environment. So the first point, if you're going to use this technology, it should be used in a community setting and it should be outpatient. These are my points of view on this slide. Second point is that whatever technology you're planning on launching, the cost or the price of the technology should be low enough so that consumers could purchase it with their own money, without hoping that an insurance company will be able to cover the costs. The third point we just covered, there can't really be a change in workflow on the part of the healthcare system. And the last point, what we call the value proposition. Right now, at least we talk about wearable technology, it's chasing after, you know, we got Fitbit, we got iWatch, it's chasing after healthy people and in their 20s and 30s. But really the best use of wearable technology is with chronic disease and the elderly. With our aging population, especially here in Canada, we save a lot of money in our healthcare system by providing support for people to age at home rather than be in a hospital, rather than be in a chronic care ward. So we want to have technologies that allow people to stay in their homes for longer periods of time without going to the hospital. And so these 4 bullet points, I think, define the only way most digital health technology will be viable. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with reimbursement problems, and you're going to be stuck with massive barriers to adoption in a hospital. So let's avoid the hospital entirely. Let's go to outpatient and community settings. Next slide, please. Right now, there is considerable confusion and fear around a number of aspects of digital technology or digital health. The main concern is a lot of companies don't want to see their products classified as medical, because if a company sees its product classified as medical, then that means there's going to be a lot of regulation. And so you've seen probably in your own respective areas of expertise, apps coming out on Android and the smartphone that have medical functions. And so the hottest area of development and regulatory right now pertains to the regulation of software. And this has really forced our regulatory environment to become much more sophisticated than it has in the past. Now, my comments from this point forward really are based on the American system. Because my opinion is that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is a global leader when it comes to thinking on regulatory issues. So even though I'm a Canadian and I teach about this stuff, I teach about the American system, not the Canadian system. If you're going to launch a new technology, you're going to be basing it on American market share, not Canadian market share. So there's only a few simple points to make from this slide. Surprise, surprise. If you have software that's involved with either the diagnosis or the treatment of a patient, it will be classified as a medical device. It will be regulated as a medical device. So that part's easy. Now let's get to the tricky part. If you can see this bullet point, mitigation, prevention of disease. That's where things get complicated. Theoretically, your running shoes prevent disease. Okay, theoretically, if you use your running shoes and you're running, that helps reduce the risk of heart attack. But we're not classifying running shoes as medical devices, at least not yet. So, so the regulatory environment is changing rapidly right now, and it's affecting the startup environment because startup companies are concerned. They don't want to be regulated as a medical product. And part of this is unjustified because if you're regulated as a medical product, it doesn't mean that's a bad thing because there's different levels of regulation. Next slide, please. Things which are not medical. Electronic copies of medical information, like a textbook. You know, if you have an app that carries information about anatomy or physiology, whatever it is, that is not a medical product. Okay? The content may be medical, but from a regulatory standpoint, that's not a medical product. Products that deal with general health and wellness. So sneakers would be an example, running shoes, or maybe, you know, the Fitbit. These are general health and wellness products. They're not regulated as medical products. And lastly, this has changed several times over the last several years because we're in a rapidly changing environment. Electronic medical records. The last iteration, the last update on this that I'm aware of, electronic medical records are no longer considered a medical device. This has been changed 3 times within the last 10 years. So the latest update that I'm aware of, electronic medical records are no longer considered medical devices. Next slide, please. Now I have to apologize here. I don't, you know, in terms of your respective interests, this may or may not be relevant to you. So we're gonna play a little game here, which I've gone through here on campus. What we're gonna do is the following. We're gonna put a piece of software on the market, and it's for medical use, but we're not gonna tell anybody it's for medical use. So the question is, if we don't tell anybody it's for medical use, will we still be regulated as a medical product? Okay, so I'm going to say that again. So let's look at the product on the left. The product on the left, when you look at it, looks like a piece of software, an app, that helps physicians calculate the dose of a drug. Now, the drug in this case is a chemotherapy agent. So let's get cute. Let's play a game. What if the manufacturer put out this software and never said... You okay there, guys? It never said it was a medical device. Okay? So what if the manufacturer put out that software and never said it was a medical device? Never said what it was for? Would they still be regulated as a medical device? And the answer is yes, they would be. Because regulatory authorities would look at a piece of software like this and they would see that based on its design, there's only one purpose for a piece of software like this, and that's to calculate dose of a drug. So even though the manufacturer never talked about what this software should be used for, never made any advertising claims, if the manufacturer just put that software out there and never said anything about it, it would still be regulated as a medical device because the design of the product clearly indicates this is for a medical purpose. All right, so that's on the left-hand side of the slide. Now let's go to the right. So the right, let's pretend for a moment we've combined two things. We've got, this is on the Apple iPhone, we've got the notepad and the calculator. Now let's pretend that we sold these two things together. Would regulators consider this a medical device? Of course not. And they wouldn't consider it a medical device because although the notepad and the calculator could be used to calculate the dose of a drug, it could also be used to keep track of baseball scores, basketball scores, movies you like, your grocery list, and your banking. So when you look at the design of the software, it doesn't indicate a clear purpose that is for medical. So the combination of these two pieces of software could be used for anything. So based on design, regulators would not classify the example on the right-hand side as a medical device. Now, we can change that. If I sell these two pieces of software and claim it's for some sort of medical purpose, like calculating a dose of a drug, then based on my claim, I'm then classified as a medical device. Okay? So in summary, whether or not you're classified as a medical device or not in the software world is, and this applies to other products, is based on your design and based on your advertising claims. So let's pull back a step. You know, when the world was simpler 15 years ago, the definition of a medical device was very straightforward. But with the proliferation of so many products out there that might be medical or might not be medical, we've now had to have a more sophisticated approach to understanding what a medical device might be. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay. This might look a little busy, guys, but we can walk our way through it. Okay. So let's picture, for example, right now what you're looking at is an onion, and we're looking at layers of an onion. Okay? The outermost layer of the onion is in blue. The inner layer is yellow, and the core of the onion is red. Now, the outermost layer of the onion, the blue, is a health product. These are products that help us be healthy, but they're not medical. So that could be a Fitbit, that could be running shoes, you know, take your pick, okay? So things which help us in our lives, lead healthy lives, but are not medical products, are called health products. So health products are not regulated as medical devices, but help us maintain a healthy lifestyle. So an example of this would be, in the software context, would be medication reminder software. Medication reminder software is not classified as a medical device. Now let's go one layer in. We go one layer in and we see we have this yellow part. Now the yellow part includes low and intermediate risk medical devices. So this would be covering medical devices that have low risk up to intermediate or medium risk medical devices. This is a general talk, guys, so there's not time to drill down on all terminology. It's just to kind of give you a sense of things. So the yellow layer here, low and middle risk medical devices. An example of this would be medical imaging software. Medical imaging software could be regulated as sort of a middle or intermediate risk medical device. And then we get to the core of the onion, the red part. This is a high risk medical device, okay? High risk. So an example of this would be software that controls a pacemaker. Okay? When we talk about risk, what we mean is the following. Should the product fail to work the way it's intended, should the product malfunction, what are the consequences for the patient? What are the consequences for the user? Okay? So that's the idea. So we look at medical devices through a prism of risk, and based on that, we assign risk levels to those products. All right, so what we've done so far is pretty straightforward. We've talked about different levels of risk for products out on the market, and we've done that by looking at different designs of products out there that represent those different levels of risk. Now, the next part I'm about to get to is very new, and lots of people are still coming to terms with this. So if you're a bit confused, that's okay, because lots of people are confused right now. All right, now let's do something different. And I like playing this with my engineers. We're going to take sneakers, which are a health product, and we're going to turn them into a medical device. So we're going to do that one of two ways. The first way is we have a sneaker here, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a strong advertising claim, a benefit for the patient. So what we could say is, if you use our sneakers, it's going to prevent heart attack. If we came out with an advertising claim that the use of our sneakers would prevent heart attack, that would most likely result in the sneakers now being regulated as a medical device. Okay? So we haven't changed the design. What we've changed is the advertising. So the stronger your claims are for the benefits of the patient, the more likely you'll be regulated as a medical device. And similarly, our patient population, or our user population, if we're selling sneakers to all people living in Brazil, we're fine. But if we're specifically selling sneakers to people who have had a broken hip, who have broken their hip within the last 6 months, now it's a different conversation. Because now the sneakers might be regulated as a medical device. Because if the sneakers fail to operate normally, if there's any error in the ability of the sneaker to be used the way it should be used, then there can be severe consequences for someone with recent hip fracture or recently a broken hip. So we can change then how a product is perceived by regulators by changing design, by changing the claims, and by changing the type of person we target to use that product. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide. Okay. People up here in Canada are not too happy with this slide. We've got a government healthcare system here, and this isn't going down too well. But I like to take a practical approach to problems. So let's walk through this. Usually there's sort of transitions on this slide, so everything's kind of showing at once. Let's say, for example, you're wearing the t-shirt with the sensors on it. So you're collecting all this data. So this woman is going for a run. She's got a sensor on her belt. She's got a sensor on her chest. She's got a sensor in her watch, and she has a sensor on her ear. Okay? So the idea here is lots and lots of data, whether it's from Fitbit or anything else. And now what she's going to do is she's going to go visit a specialist or her family doctor. Well, the family doctor is not reimbursed or paid to review that kind of data. The doctor is not trained on how to review that kind of data, and the doctor does not have the resources to review that kind of data. You know, we could be talking about literally millions of data points here. This would be a large data set. So because of the problems of bringing new technology in the hospitals, specifically for digital health, I don't see this happening. I don't think digital health is really going to become a reality in our hospitals, not for a long time. Instead, what I see happening is, is the entrepreneurs are going to take over here, and rightly so. So let's look to the left of our slide. You see that green box there? That's the startup company. So we're talking about a company of medical consultants. These would be biostatisticians, and they would offer their services to individual citizens who are willing to pay to analyze and crunch all that data. So let's take a scenario. Let's say we're talking about Jane, and she's in her early 60s. Jane is still active, but Jane has had some heart problems in the past, and she's on an anticoagulant. So Jane goes to see this biostatistician, this medical consultant in private sector. She gives 2 or 3 years of data from her Fitbit or anything else she's wearing, and that biostatistician or that statistician will analyze that data. And we'll come back to Jane and say the following. Jane, the next time you see your cardiologist, you should mention 2 things about how your body has behaved in the last 2 years. So the use then here of digital technology is not to diagnose. It's really to screen. It's to make consumers more informed about their health, so they have a better idea of the kinds of questions they need to be asking their specialist or their family doctor. So I see this as the model for the foreseeable future, that we're going to start to see startup companies formed with medical consultants who will start to analyze this data. Now, in closing, I've sort of overlooked the most basic point, and you may chuckle at this. And the most basic point is the following. Right now, there is not a good use case for wearable technology, okay? So in other words, there's not really a good practical use for wearable technology right now. That's going to change, but right now there's not really a good practical use for that technology. It's going to change in the future, maybe the near future, the far future. So there's many different segments of digital health technology. I've talked only about a few of them. The reimbursement problems are pervasive and affect almost every area of digital health technology. And then other barriers are more specific for wearable technology. Okay, guys, well, thanks for your attention, and thanks for the invitation. If you have any questions, just let us know.
Professor Parker.
Hello. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for your presentation, very enlightening. In fact, I have 3 questions, not only one. I really would like to start from the end when you mentioned that many technologies, especially when we talk about the wearables, they are not very useful up to now. And I have an opinion. I have been talking with several key opinion leaders here in Brazil. And when I talk about key opinion leaders, I'm referring to hospitals, I'm referring to medical societies, I have been talking with entrepreneurs, so on and so forth. And what I noticed is that many of them, they are not willing to share their data or their information. And in my opinion, very likely, this is one of the reasons why the wearables, because they are very intensive in the use of data, and you have algorithms that interpret, make the correlation, so on and so forth. How is in Canada? Do you see the players there willing to share the information in order to extract the benefits of the good use of this data? This is the first question, okay? I have two more.
To be honest, I haven't seen that yet, because you're describing a circumstance I haven't seen come up yet. Your question, the scenario you described is an interesting one. The reaction I get from physicians in Canada is wearable technology, that's really cool, but if you bring it into my clinic, it's a pain in the butt. I'm not aware of any physicians actually archiving or collecting this data. Right now, the data is seen as a curiosity that's a distraction to their clinic. We're not even at the point yet where people covet this data and are not willing to share it.
Okay, thank you. The second one is regarding the collaboration between entrepreneurs. And just to mention, I am a digital entrepreneur in the healthcare sector here in Brazil. And what we see here is that entrepreneurs are, let's say, working alone. So we struggle to find financing, we struggle to find customers, we struggle with many aspects of our local market. But differently from what we see in the United States, we don't see that strong collaboration between, let's say, universities and startups. I'm not saying that there is no collaboration, but we don't see it as strong as is in the US and very likely in Canada. So my question is, how is it in Canada? How is the collaboration, not only between universities and entrepreneurs, but also medical societies, entrepreneurs, hospitals and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to surprise myself by saying it's actually pretty good. We have a lot of contact with industry. We have a lot of contact with startups. I work with a biotechnology program here. I just had Roche in today, which for those of you who don't know, is a big pharmaceutical company, to speak to my students. We have lots of contact. So that's not a problem. There's lots of collaboration, lots of contact, lots of discussion. But in all honesty, though, to pursue that question with any kind of depth, you would need to speak to a different type of professional, because there are people who are sort of very focused on exploring the issues and the challenges of translational research. What you might explore on your side, and this is outside my area of expertise, okay, but what you might explore, and we have challenges with this too, is the university culture. We certainly have areas of our university that think that everyone in private sector is evil and think that all companies are evil. So we do have some of that attitude, but we're changing, and part of that change is being supported by our students, because our students are very keen to get involved with startups, to understand what's going on with industry. So our students are very supportive of these changes taking place in our faculty. Again, that question would be best addressed by a different type of person than myself, but from what I understand, what I see of this process, there's a lot of collaboration.
Cool. And finally, my last question is regarding, let's say, the level of complexity of the technologies, let's say, within the, let's say, what we call let's say, the digital health, or let's say health tech. There are several names for it. But what we've seen, I am assuming that in Canada, as is the case in the US and in Europe, access to healthcare services is not an issue, right? On the other hand, here in Brazil, as you might be aware, we have a strong problem with people having access to, let's say, basic healthcare services. And for this reason, we believe in our company here that one of the key issues that we need to solve as entrepreneurs is to improve access to healthcare services. And if we compare this kind of technology with the, let's say, the level of complexity when we talk about big data or personal self or wearables or other technologies that are very important. I'm not saying that they are not good or there is no fit between these technologies and the market. But in our opinion, here in Brazil, we have room for other types of technologies, let's say more basic ones. How is your opinion about that? How is it in Canada? And just a small explanation, what we do in our company here is to facilitate the access of, let's say, the people who are not able to afford, let's say, expensive healthcare services. We help them to find physicians who are struggling to find patients. In other words, we are trying to solve two problems at once. And here in Brazil, this is particularly, a key issue because we don't have enough hospitals, enough physicians, and there are a lot of people out there in need of healthcare services. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Good questions, by the way. I think the best model that I can think of, that's comparable to, that would be appropriate for your question would be Northern Canada. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the geography of Canada, most of our population is concentrated near the border of the United States, which creates a problem because if Trump becomes president, we're going to have all these Americans coming north, so we're going to have to put up our own wall just to stop all that from happening. Sorry, couldn't resist. So we have our northern communities, which are very far north in Canada. That's where there's going to be the greatest receptivity to telemedicine. digital health. So when we have remote communities in the northern part of Canada, that would be, I think, by the sounds of it, equivalent to the situation you're describing in Brazil. Now, having said that, we're still working with old models here because of everything else I've discussed still remains a barrier. If you want to do telemedicine, if you want to do diagnosis by video conference, you need a reimbursement code for that. So the northern communities in Canada may be similar to the challenges that you guys face in Brazil. But we're still struggling with that because right now, our only real solution to it is the old one. And that is when physicians find out where they're going to be placed, because there's only so many spots in the big cities, some of our physicians, like our police officers, are forced to go to the northern communities, do their time, and then they come back. So telemedicine holds great promise, but there's a difference between the promise of the technology and the practical application. So reimbursement codes are a big issue here. So telemedicine, I see as a good solution to that kind of problem, but it's not really happening yet. The only way telemedicine right now, and I take it a step further when I say telemedicine, like let's use an actual example, remote robotic surgery. That's the only place that's really been successfully sort of considered is with the military for conflict. So surgeons don't have to be so close to the area of conflict. So I hate to say it, but to my knowledge, Canada is still working with old technology here because of all the problems we've talked about so far in the adoption of this technology. Even though the best use of this technology is for remote communities, many of those barriers still remain. And we have not overcome those barriers yet. So it's not a very encouraging answer, I feel bad for that, but we're still struggling with that same problem, so far as I know, for northern communities.